coming up here in a few minutes, and discussing the new jobless recovery, the oxymoron. Bob Chapman, though, start recapping your story. So you're talking to an owner of a large company that you know well, and he's talking about trying to make large loans. Instead of going to a mega bank, he goes to a medium-sized Midwestern, who they admit many of them are flush with cash from good investments. And what happens next?
He's told by the management that the reason why Ken Lay has quit his job as head of Bank of America is because
Ken Lay, you mean somebody else?
Ken Lewis, excuse me.
It's okay. Well, I mean, birds of a feather. It's hard to Madoff Lay. Go ahead.
Frito Lay. Anyway, it's not a laughing matter, as a matter of fact. What they're doing is they're taking the toxic waste that the Fed is not buying directly, and they're dumping it into Bank of America, and they're going to take it under this coming year. Now, that's important inside information. And this Quorum Bank that just went under in Chicago, M&B took them over, and they refused to take any of the bad assets. The Fed had to take them in order to get Quorum out of the way.
And so is that a monetization?
Yes, absolutely.
But let's go back, Bob, because you don't just say things. You've broken scores of stories here. Months later, it comes out. You said when Madoff was first arrested that we would then be told he had cancer from your inside source. Then they later came out and said that. You're saying that when you say in the next year, you mean by the end of 2010, they're going to pile all the toxic assets so he's getting out, kind of like Greenspan left so he could blame it on Bernanke. You're saying that they're going to bring it down. What will that mean to the economy?
It certainly won't help it. And the American taxpayer will end up paying the total bill for taking all of these toxic assets and dumping it to Bank of America and allowing Bank of America to go under. And it's going to be probably as much as $1 trillion, if not more. Because, you know, the Fed right now is buying $1.2 trillion in toxic assets from banks and insurance companies and brokerage firms right now. And so, and incidentally, the source told me also that there were 40 banks just in the Chicago area that are walking zombies. And none of the other banks will take them over because they won't assume any of those toxic assets that they have. And so the Fed's going to have to end up taking them down. And that's why my projection over the next 4 or 5 years of 3,200 to 4,200 of 8,400 banks will go under. The second story I've got, and this I backed into, is that how the Fed is financing the stock market and keeping it at the levels that they are is through a group of 21 primary traders who work with the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, and they're just pouring all the money that they could ever use into these entities, which in turn are going into the market and buying. And they're doing the same thing with the same kind of entities in Europe to keep the stock market up over there so people won't think everything is terrible. And of course, at the same time, they attack the commodity market in gold and silver. And one of the good things about gold and silver is I think they've almost run out of gold. And so they're going to have to use paper or derivatives in order to do what they're doing. But that's how the stock market is being financed. And if you want to read the inside of all the guts of the story, it's in this issue coming out tomorrow, the International Forecaster, which you can get free by just calling or using my email address.
The internationalforecaster.com is the website. We link to a lot of your stories at Infowars.com. Bob, in layman's terms, explain it to people, because the mainstream media, every day when I watch television to monitor what they're up to, they say, this is something new. We know it doesn't make sense to you, but the economists at the government are experts. You're going to have a jobless recovery. You're going to lose your paycheck or have it cut. or lose your job, but the big banks are doing well and the Fortune 100 are doing good. And so that's the new gauge of the economy. You lose your job or get your pay cut or go to part-time, the working poor. And so a new booming economy is soup kitchen lines. Bob?
Yeah, and it won't work, of course. And that's what I said on CBS this morning, and they went ballistic. But anyway, you can't throw money at a problem and make it work. I mean, anybody who has read any kind of history whatsoever realizes that, especially economic history. And so all this money they're spending, in the final analysis, will end up in a deflationary depression. No matter what they do, they're just buying time. They started this, and the point of no return was in June of 2003. That's 7 years ago. They can't go back. They want to go back. As per the Bilderberger meeting, they said, look, this thing's out of hand. What can we do? And they were told he can't do anything. You're going to have to ride it out. And that's where we're headed. We're on a horse headed for the front lines, and the horse and you are being shot at. But the economy is going to continue to have the same kind of high unemployment we have now, 21.4%. If you take U6 and strip out the birth-death ratio. And so it's going to increase slightly by the end of the year and increase slightly next year. And I also expect that we won't get the $2 trillion for Congress for the second stimulus package that I predicted in January. What I think we'll get 400 to 800 billion, and the banks are going to start lending again, and that is immediate monetization, and they're going to fill in for perhaps another trillion or $1.25 trillion, whatever, to give them the $2 trillion to go sideways in the economy for another year. So we're going to be looking at probably a year and a half of sideways motion, but unemployment is not going to improve.
Bob, the calls we have on hold, Sean, Jeff, Hannibal, Terry, Todd, and others, going to be all over the map, but I know you can comment on any of it. Been fighting the globalists for close to 50 years. But I have a few other economic questions I want to get into. And I also wanted to ask you first, did you see the editorial written that was published in hundreds of world newspapers, including the New York Times, by Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the Puppet General Assembly? Obama's the real head of the UN, the head of the Security Council. And that treason right there. In fact, I want your comment on that. That was just in a few newspapers and on CNN, but saying he's now president of the world, ha, ha, ha. And they're lauding him with the Nobel Peace Prize for expanding both the wars. But I wanted to get your take on thousands of articles per week. You can go to Google News, type in world government, new world order, global governance, and there are thousands per week on each term saying world government's good, saying they're going to tax all our carbon in our homes, saying that it's to reduce population. I mean, they say world government. They all give speeches saying it. And Gordon Brown is in the news saying we want a world socialist government. But then meanwhile, other publications write articles, especially about myself, more than anybody else, saying I'm a lying, insane person. There's no world government, no carbon tax. I mean, what is the strategy here where they admit they're doing it all but say it's good, but then say none of it exists? I mean, are they just trying to condition people to get used to insane lying or just a fog of frazzled propaganda? I mean, this is getting insane.
Well, I think it's propaganda, and as I pointed out a couple of days ago in Beck's program on China, 95% truth, 5% misdirection and propaganda. And it's so typical of what you pick up with the mainline media. And you're not going to get the truth. You're going to get the truth with Alex Jones and a handful of other people on the radio and a few publications, and that's about it. Although I will say, and I say this every week, we are gaining on them. We have them running, and they've made a lot of mistakes things aren't working out the way that they'd want them to, and that's why you see the offensive that's going on for the acceptance of the idea of world government, which you just cited. And they're going to continue to do that because they want to wrap this thing up as quickly as they can and not have the economy collapse on them in the process. They will collapse the economy when they want to.
Well, it's clear they're already
the final takeover.
It's clear they're collapsing Main Street and the industrial economy, and that was what NAFTA and GATT and the globalists' own documents state that that's their plan, to destroy industrial capacity, to bring in total centralization and total dependency of the population on the elite that control the planet with their fiat currency, buying the world through their Ponzi scheme. I mean, these are con artists that took over the world. I mean, it's really that simple. But